This is Dr. Evan Osar with Fitness Education Seminars. Welcome to this edition of Fitness Insider. Last time we talked about the piriformis and some of the causes of why the piriformis gets so tight, including people over gripping and using their hips as their posterior hip as primary stabilizers, especially during patterns as the squat where they really squeeze a butt at the top, lunges, bridges where they're taught to squeeze, and what happens is they jam the hip forward in the socket. That's one of the most common causes for tightness in the piriformis. And then they can't release through the piriformis when they squat, lunge, step, so therefore they start to get more knee pain. And the knee starts to internally rotate because the hip won't rotate. So I showed you a couple ways to release the hip in the last video. In this video I'll show you just a couple cues on how to cue the squat and split squat so that when you teach your clients to use their piriformis, they don't go back into those habitual patterns that start to tighten that piriformis up. The first pattern I like to use is a supported door squat. So I'll open the door, grab the handles of the door. I want to have the client sit back through the hip so that they really understand how to centrate and sit back, posteriorly glide that hip in the socket as they perform their pattern. I'll hold for a second down at the bottom, stay nice and tall, and then come back up tall without jamming the hip forward. Sit back, centrate the hip, come back up tall. One more time. Sit back, control, come back up, control without jamming forward. Then once they understand how to do that, then I'll take it right into a split squat. With this pattern, same concept. I want to teach them how to get the hip to sit back in the socket as they go into my split squat pattern. This is key because again, that tight piriformis, the stiff posterior capsule will restrict posterior hip glide in the socket and jam it forward, creating impingement and other issues with the entire lower extremity mechanics. So again, here, I'll even have the client put their finger in their posterior glute aspect and in the front of the hip, so they keep the front of the hip relaxed and their fingers are directing the hip to come back down towards my posterior fingers here. So I'm gonna have the client sit back into their hip, relaxing through the front, and then relaxing through the back so the hip glides back, and then lift from my fingers down here to lift up and forward. Sit back, keep the lower extremity aligned, and then come back up out of it without squeezing forward and jamming the hip forward in the socket. One more time. Sit back, guiding my fingers here to allow the hip to sit back towards these posterior fingers, and then lift up through the deep lower glutes to lift back up out of that pattern. So in these two series of videos, I showed you how to release through the hip, and then how to use and control the hip in the socket, especially centration, by allowing the hip to glide back in the socket as the client goes through common patterns such as a squat, split squat, and even lunges. Same thing, so the client's lunging, it's the same concept of getting the hip to sit back in the socket and control and stay centrated. This is Dr. Evan Osar. We'll catch you next time.